Recording in progress.
Hello, everyone out there in the world. That's the average size of our audience for most episodes. Everyone in the world. This is Dwight, your host for The Broken Brain, where we talk about the intersection of psychology, culture, and health, and happiness, and boy, lots of other things. And we're going to touch on every single one of them today, I think. I am wonderfully excited and happy to have Lisa Anzaldua here today, who is a holistic psychotherapist, a transpersonal coach, and helping people to find ways to break through whatever it is that might be holding you back. And we'll talk more about that. You do not only individual work with people, but also intensive work with people for periods of certain weeks and things like that, and just a lot of different ways to help people approach change. So, Lisa, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
Now, I'll have you give a more in-depth analysis for everybody of what it is you do and how you approach therapy and change.
Yeah, so there's a few different categories, and I try to summarize them into one, which is very difficult to do. But let's just say I've got three buckets of processes or people that I work with. Let's say one is women who are married to men on the autism spectrum, high functioning, what they used to call Asperger's, high functioning autism. And so now we just say ASD level 1, and it just on the spectrum. So women who are allistic, usually known as neurotypical, but that doesn't, sometimes they have a ADHD or something. They're not neurotypical. So we would say allistic, married to men who are on the spectrum, and they're adults and usually they come to me when they've been in the relationship for 20 plus years. And they've just discovered they themselves have just discovered that their partner is autistic. And then it's a whole world of things opens up to them about their past experience with this person throughout the years, the challenges they've had come to light. And I help them process that realization and do a lot of healing work and reclaiming the self, stepping into a place of empowerment so that they can enhance the quality of the relationship, or just have a bird's eye view of the maze they've been in throughout those years, right?
Yeah, it's something when people find that diagnosis later in life, especially it can be difficult, but oftentimes can be very freeing, especially for some of those kind of issues.
Yes, right. Yes, because now they have a platform to work from. It's no longer just being in the dark and not understanding what's wrong, what's going, to them it's wrong, so to speak, because it's not a familiar way of engaging.
Yeah. That's very interesting to me. I'm excited to hear your approach with that, but I had a therapist of my own who is autistic, and she and her husband do little seminars around here for people who are in a mixed, a kind of like mixed neurotypical, or maybe not neurotypical necessarily, but non-autistic and autist individuals that are married. Yeah, that's
okay. Yeah, yes. Yeah, it's a neat. So the experience is called Cassandra syndrome, and I know the community is the therapy community is, we want to be, of course, ASD affirming, of course. The whole point to it is so that they can learn each other's way of communicating and feeling and knowing. But there's been some pushback, so to speak, with that umbrella term, which I disagree with that, because it's a beautiful way. I love the fact that we have a name to call it. Obviously, it's not a true syndrome. It's ongoing traumatic relationship syndrome, potentially. But now we have a coined name that is getting the attention of women who desperately need, women and men, who desperately need some guidance and help. So I'm sticking with it for the time being, at least, until I get into trouble.
Well, it's an interesting thing. I mean, we're always evolving with that. I tend to always want to listen to people who are on the spectrum mostly to see what they think of different kinds of things and terms. But with that I'm so glad to hear that too, because I work with a lot of people who over the years I've worked with tons of people who have autism in one form or another, or one level or another. And that sort of affirmation is really, really important, because it's easy for people to identify with, oh, wow, you're dealing with someone who you don't get where they're coming from. And it's like, well, yeah, but so the person on the spectrum is dealing with that with everyone who doesn't think the way they do and expects them to change. And so you can see where both people in a marriage have to figure out, how do we work together, not how do I get you to knock something off and be more like me or resent you for the way you are or whatever. Yeah.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. It is so tricky. I have to admit it is tricky, but there is a process. There's a process. So there's hope.
And so you had said that makes up a big part of what you do. And then you address other aspects as well.
Well, yes. So then you mentioned the intensive. So I work with couples with intensive neurodiverse or otherwise couples. And I'm just all for building that momentum. So it's important to get to the root of challenges within a relationship. So usually they come and they say, we have conflict because of communication, or we're feeling disconnected, or we're no longer how we used to be, or, we can't resolve this one particular issue, or it's been years of little, cuts by 1,000 shards. And, so they're suffering and they want to resolve that. So, we can't just address things on the surface level behaviorally. It won't last. So we have to do some deep diving. And sometimes those roots are related to your own early life attachment experiences that are now bringing forth into the present. And I think this is kind of common knowledge for the most part now. But point being that with an intensive, it's like the psyche says, okay, we're going all in here. Let's create 8 hours of momentum, get to the heart, the root. Let's be the most vulnerable we possibly can with the right guidance, of course, and really up level some stuff and really come to clarity and healing and understanding. So I love the intensive 8 hours and then 8 hours and then 8 hours, potentially 3 days in a row. And it's just, it's better than, in my opinion, once a week for 50 minutes, because that kind of draws itself out and people lose the momentum. I have to admit, oftentimes. So,
do you usually see that as something people do before they jump into maybe ongoing kind of follow up and stuff, or is it meant to be kind of a close and open? Like this is a thing all by itself, this intervention.
Yeah, it would be lovely if that were the case, but I have to admit about half that is the case. But I end up hearing back from them in a few months, and then they have some residual things that they hadn't yet followed through with or need help with. So yeah, so no, it's not a one and done necessarily. There are those that have those massive breakthroughs and transformations, yes, but oftentimes we do we meet, maybe a month later, and then every month. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, and I imagine it just as like so many other forms of treatment, it's one piece of a treatment plan, and ongoing communication is going to be important, whether or not it's in a therapist's office or whatever. Obviously, you have to have that. Now, when people come in, I've noticed that when people come in working on a relationship, it's almost always the very first thing people say is communication. And I like how you say it's like trying to break it down a little bit deeper than that, right? And it's not untrue, right? That is at the crux of most problems is some form of communication, but that is a broad umbrella.
It's broad. And it's like, yes, communication, but why is the communication that way? Because sometimes, you have to get to know the depth of yourself and the other person to understand why they're communicating so that they can choose a different way of communicating versus, and in addition to, I should say, techniques for communication. I give them 6 steps from now on, use these 6 steps when you communicate, and it could be life-changing. So in theory, you could, but are the deeper things being resolved? The deeper sense of self. Are you embodying a person that communicates effectively? That's what you want to do. You want to embody that person, and that requires healing, in some ways, and healing your traumas potentially related to expressing your needs and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What do you find when someone is coming into something like that? What are some of the biggest obstacles to really, jumping in? Because that's pretty heavy. And I don't know, once again, my experience has been, and what I've seen is oftentimes you have people coming in and you might have 2 people here who both want to save their relationship, but often one of them is the one who made the appointment.
Yes.
So sometimes they come in maybe equally ready, but sometimes they come in like with an or else attached to the premise of what they're doing, right?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So it's important for us as the coach or the therapist to be aware of that, be cognizant of that, and make sure. And and you can't force anything, but do the best you can to allow that resistant person to know they're safe, that they're safe, that they're not going. The therapist isn't going to just assume things to be true and not listen to the depth or the importance, the things that are important to that person, the person that's resistant. So I think once you break the barrier, so to speak, through and conveying that they can trust you, I think which can be tricky, because oftentimes when you do that, sometimes then the other partner feels like, oh, well, you're not hearing what I'm saying. So it's balanced. It's tricky, but possible.
Yeah, people don't think about that sometimes, is the maintenance of balance is one of the first things I ever learned about if you're working with multiple people, family therapy or couples, right, is that trying to have some form of balance, which doesn't always mean equal time to each thing either, right? It's not like a transactional kind of balance. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's so important, right? Because sometimes that balance means because I'm focused on what your partner is saying and what they're feeling, the other person's going to start to soften their heart, have deeper understanding, see things differently. So you are indirectly working with that other person as well, even though you're not transactionally engaged with them in that moment. So things like that. Yeah.
I'm interested, and I'd love for people out there to be able to hear a little bit about how you structure an intensive session. So when you come in, I could just think like, okay, here's our session 1, 8 hours today. And I could see that being intimidating, from all 3 people in the room. Let me put it that way. You've got the couple, but then you got the therapist who's like, all right. And I can only imagine the very first time you do an 8-hour therapy session must be a memorable time in your life.
Yes. Well said. Well said. It's really 7 because we have a break in between, but yeah, it's just,
so number one, there's probably some breaks built in there, right?
Yes, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. So you set the stage by saying, okay, what is our intention here? What is the ultimate long-term, bigger intention? So we establish that. And then I ask questions like, for instance, how would you know that after these 7 hours of time together, how would you know that something has shifted for you that is significant and lasting? And then, in other words, I'm starting to uncover what their true goals are and their values and what they seek to get from this experience. And it sort of sets the stage so that now we have this focus, whatever modality I end up using, whatever technique, we have a focus. We know that that's the end result. And, classic begin with the ending and the end in mind, Stephen Covey is classic doing that, because now your brain is also aware of anything that will support that realization of that goal. So it begins like that. And then I usually then describe, I get very clear about what the person's perspective of the problems are. So I have that, loud and clear right in front of me. I have the with certainty, so that takes some time, of course. Can you imagine that takes a while to get to the heart of that? Because sometimes whoever I'm asking that question to, they don't even know necessarily. Mm-hmm. So we start talking about it. They think it's X, Y, and Z, but it's ABC. No, I should have said it the other way.
No, I get it. Yeah. Yeah. And isn't it interesting? Because a lot of issues in relationships do boil down to assumptions, and particularly you had said that a lot of people that you work with have been together for a long time, right?
Sometimes.
Yeah. Oh, that was in reference to your other specialty, or the other side of your specialty, right? Is people come in post-diagnosis as an adult. But I guess I should ask that then, what do you see as kind of is there a trend in demographic for people coming into intensive? Have they been together a while or not always, or?
Gosh, it's across the board, but it's certainly folks, women and couples, I should say, men, women, heterosexual or not, coming in that are just beginning their relationship, and they're starting to feel that it's already losing its, the attachment, starting to feel that there's an interruption to the attachment, let's just say, or there's something hasn't yet been resolved, and they can't, their hopes for what was to come. The roadmap they kind of laid out together is starting to become a little bit unclear and uncertain. So they need some guidance there. And those are the newer couples, younger, so to speak, younger to the marriage or relationship, I should say. Yeah. And then you've got those who have been in the relationship for years and years. I mean, they're at the breaking point. So it's crisis. It's relationship crisis. It is that what you said, this or nothing. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, those are the best to work with.
Those are the best to work with, you said. The ones.
Yes.
Yeah. Is that maybe talk a little bit, if you would, about that? Makes sense as you say that to me. What would you tell people that's the best one to work with?
Because they're at this sort of precipice, right? Like, here's an opportunity to, that means there's two parts of them, and there's many more parts, but there's essentially two parts that come to session. One that is sees the value of the relationship, doesn't want it to end, all the things for various reasons. And then there's another part that sees potential outside of the relationship and relief and peace from being away from it. So you can work with both of them. We don't bulldoze any one of those perspectives and try to override them and make this person come to a conclusion, side with one of those parts entirely. That's not the goal. The goal is to get to know deeply each of those parts, so that it can convey what it needs to convey and heal what it needs to heal, and potentially see, make peace, allow those two parts to make peace so that you're in resonance, heart-brain coherence, and making decisions that are actually in your highest good, not reactive, not because of just pain that has been a result of the relationship. Because with pain as a result of the relationship, there's opportunity for healing, and that may take time. Is one willing and wanting to be in the relationship while they heal from the past aspects of the relationship? That's a possibility, but sometimes it's not, truthfully.
Yeah, to be able to heal while together.
Yeah, that's sometimes that's not possible. I don't mean to sound like hopeless about it, but in actuality, if someone has built up, if they've, what happens is that we start to build walls around our hearts, essentially. And we get to a point that, so I'm getting into kind of nitty gritty. I feel like I'm kind of getting a little nuanced, but particularly
I think it's really, I think this is a really important side to this kind of work. I think that we tend to think that there's only one outcome that we're shooting for. And oftentimes when someone's coming in for this kind of work, they are hoping, at least someone is hoping to stay together, maybe both. But as you put it, the goal of any counseling is health, right? Is to be psychologically healthy, not to have a rigid expectation. And sometimes even one that we think of as just a natural can become a rigid expectation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So wouldn't it be nice if then the decision can be made whether to stay within the relationship or not? Is that in your highest good for your soul to flourish, for the evolution of your spirit, your soul, mind, body, spirit? Is that the highest for you? And so you have to, maybe that means a decoupling is the way forward. Mm-hmm. We're not, just because it sounds good to say, let's no matter what, stick it out in the marriage. Yes, that is, in theory, that's beautiful. That's a great concept, but potentially it's not the highest for both of you. And we come to that realization in those intensives,
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the biggest points, especially if going back to that kind of communication as that big, huge framework of things, being able to communicate in a healthy way is something you get from good counseling, regardless of an outcome in that regard, if that makes sense. I've seen people who I've worked with that in the midst of therapy have made a decision, one or both of them, that separation is happening, and sometimes divorce, and then they continue. Some of them just keep going. A lot of people just stop. They're like, well, we're done then. It's not working. But some continue but now the goal is different, to be able to treat each other with respect and do what's right and safe for their kids while divorcing, right? Yeah.
Amen to that. Yes. I think that's so, I'm glad you said that, because there's this, remember I said there are 3 categories. There's actually 4. The other category is the transition phase for men and women. You have options, right? In that transition, you can get to a state of let's just call it for generic terms, negativity, where you anger toward the other person, which is these are all relevant emotions, by the way. I'm not saying that they're not, but you can stay in this downward spiral of haste and because you're hurt, and you're vulnerable. But that leads to nothing of benefit for your own self, for your own frequency, for your own evolution. So how does one, in a healthy, very, very healthy way, and what that I mean by that is doing the shadow work, doing the healing, the deep, deep healing work that you need to do, so that anger, resentment, non-forgiveness of the other person is not present. Rather, you process those things so that you can be a loving being to each other, and psychologically, emotionally, energetically, and release each other that way, as opposed to the other way around. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What was it that led you to focus on issues of neurodiversity? That might sound a bit funny because you'd think that like everybody, right, in counseling and in psychology, but people might be surprised. You see on the inside, I've had tons of people over the years that have maybe made a referral to me because they say, "Oh, I think that they may have autism," and it's like as if that's a whole different branch of communication for everyone needs to, and not that there's not things to know, but I've always felt like, wow, I started working with neurodivergent people of one kind or another just by talking to them and assuming that I was their therapist, and that's where you learn most of it. But anyway, so your focus on there about that, the dynamic of neurodiversity in relationships, how did you hone in on that?
It was funny. One of my degrees is in transpersonal psychology, and one of my professors who I adored and I got so much wisdom and value from, he spoke often about being autistic and spoke to certain things that he was opposed to, which is applied behavioral therapy for children and that sort of thing. But anyway, point being,
big thing nowadays. Yeah. Once again, listening to people who are autistic, right, and saying, "Did you like that?" No. Well, maybe that's important. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, it's important to talk about that. Yes, yeah. So that was enlightening so that was my first, communication with somebody who I realized, oh, this is a thing. It's called autism, and this is how one would present. And but then coincidentally, of course, now I see that it's in my family and potentially my own self. But coincidentally, I had an interview for a therapist position at a practice for neurodiversity, and from there I started studying more and more and more, and now have been there for 3 years. And I love my neurodiverse folks. I love the way it's so fascinating sometimes to get to know them and to communicate with them, because of the way they see the world is just. It's phenomenal sometimes. Of course, it's the spectrum, so it's across the board. But I still have a warm kind of space in my heart for folks. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm curious your thoughts about this, because it's something I tend to think is that I think the direction philosophically that we're taking, I like what I see as anyway the major movement is to value neurodiversity as like, here is the spectrum of different ways of brains working and things. And if you look at it as far as cultural diversity, right, we always used to be like, oh, wow, there's diversity over there. And I think that's becoming more to where we're saying like, well, the standard, there's not one standard is like, here's the majority in our nation. It's like, well, we all know white is normal. Everything else isn't, right? And as we've hopefully moved, many of us hopefully have moved past that to say, oh, diversity includes everybody, and there's inclusion by those that have societal power and everything, and there's all these structures and things to be aware of, majority, minority, whatever. But to appreciate that diversity is a all humans thing. I feel like we're moving that way mentally to say we all have diverse minds, first of all individually, but then even when we group and even when there are diagnoses involved, and whether or not diagnoses will even continue to be a thing generationally, I don't know. But anyway, just that we're kind of appreciating like, oh, it's not y'all over there and us over here. It's like, what kind of diversity? Here's, if someone's like me where they test positive for ADHD and bipolar, and I'm over here and they're over here, and we're all kind of on this scale. Does that make some sense? I get that vibe from your work, I guess is why I'm asking you about it.
Yeah. And you mentioned so many things there. So number one is, yes, with the diversity, and wouldn't it be wonderful if we began to accept that and then worked on ways to understand each other to the extent that we're not being hurt or offended by the behavior and way of seeing of the other person. Yeah. That's the work right there. That's really the work.
Yes, absolutely. I feel like, a lot of things traditionally, which gets into ABA, right, is make you normal kind of a thing. And once again, getting back to like, what is normal? Well, normal is me. Oh, okay, great. No, but it's like, stop doing that. It has been some of the past treatment for people, especially on the autism spectrum, I think.
Yes. Yeah. Oh. Yeah. And it's interesting to hear both sides of because then you also hear the parents of the children who say, thank God I did that, because now, my home life I can be emotionally stable and less stressed, and I can function and work and do what I need. So you hear both, empathy I have empathy for both sides of that.
Sure. Yeah, you got to be able to sit still to hold a job or whatever, it is hard to balance that out. How do you see that in regards to the relationship piece? Is there things where people have been like, oh, for 20 years, I've been telling him to knock that off, and he just won't. And so you need to help me tell him to knock it off. Or
it just pretty much sounds like you sound like that was exactly what they say. No, it's very common that they show up saying, I have been asking for this. I have been begging. So my heart is literally, I can feel both perspectives so clearly. They've been saying, in the times when I need them the most, I'm, a child is injured, or a parent passes, or the absence of their partner is so profound that they have to suffer all of on their own, and they feel abandoned. So it's a lot of rejection, abandonment, not feeling seen and understood, and no into me you see. There's not that experience for the autistic partner in general. So usually that's what they come to sessions saying, I essentially, they don't use these words necessarily, but they've put their entire, their entire executive functioning, overfunctioning, and so raising the children, being a million things at once, and not having the validation, presence, support of their partner in the way that they felt they needed. And thus they built up so much pain and heartache and resentment and anger and walls around their heart, that they are just in this position that they are in now, where now the children have grown up and they realize, okay, what is this? I feel void inside. I have nobody with me. I'm alone. I'm rejected. Yet I'm attached to this person because I've been with them for this many years. And now what? And now I know he's ASD. And so all these years he couldn't help it. I wish I could go back in time and see it from a new lens, see it from that lens. Would I have done things differently? So they're in a very, they arrive very sad, very hopeless, very exhausted, sometimes psychosomatic illness, and they're here, and then their partner is there with them, and they're like, oh, well, now I know that that's who I am. I'm ASD, but now what? And, the ASD partner has shame, has remorse, but they are also like, but I didn't even know that I was hurting you. I didn't even know that. That was never my intention. And so now we've got to reverse the trauma cycle, introduce tools so that you can, and work on healing so that the holistic partner can even be receptive to the new behavior and experience of the ASD partner as they change, because you have built up so many walls that potentially you can't even be receptive to that new effort by the ASD partner. So, it is. I use this word a lot. It's tricky because it is.
Yeah, you mentioned the factor of, I guess, what we call attribution in there too, right? Of like, what do I attribute my partner's actions to? They do this because they don't like me. And it's like, well, actually, no, I did that because I didn't have the social reciprocity inherent to know that you wanted that without being told. And even if being told, it took me a while to learn it.
Precisely.
Right. It's like, that's different. And you don't hate me if that second one is the reason.
Precisely. Yeah. Well said.
It gets into sort of like the really deep, just in our guts, assumptions that we have about the way people do. I remember years ago, it wasn't a client or anything, just a person who, this, anybody in the field, someone finds out, oh, you're a therapist? Let me tell you something,
Yes.
I had someone tell me once, though, that they had I believe it was a grandchild. It might have been a niece or nephew. I don't remember because I didn't know the person well, but they just said that they had a child in their life, not their own, who had been diagnosed, and that they were a very huggy family, and that this child did not like to be hugged. And so the parents were like, everybody, do not make them hug. And which is not a bad practice for any child, by the way, to have bodily autonomy. But in particular, and they said that even though they knew in their head, it's like, I know that that's healthier for this kid, but they felt offended that they wouldn't hug them. But yet in their head, they know I shouldn't feel offended that they won't hug me, but they still felt it. And there was this like tug of war that they said was very hard to overcome, this little, like, I don't want to be miffed and resentment towards this kid, and they think they don't like me and everything. But whereas in their head, they know why, but there's a tug of war going on there.
Gosh, yeah, I'm so glad you said that. And oh my gosh, that is something that really needs to be worked through on so many levels, right? So you have to start doing self-inquiry. Why is this so important to me? And what is the story I'm telling myself? And here's the thing. But if one feels they need that affection to feel connected and bonded, then here's our conundrum, right? Because your mind is trying to say, like you said, let me get a new perspective here. Let me process that and rise above this and see it differently. However, my emotional body is longing for that. So now feels like there's this emptiness, this void. And so that is the ultimate conundrum. Like, if I were to summarize the experience of those two ways of thinking and feeling in the world, allistic, non and ASD, I would say that is the conundrum of the allistic partner.
And then with a partner, right? With a partner, it's different than if it's like your grandkid or something.
Yeah, so I know. Yeah, so you're speaking of with children.
Problem. I got to wrap my mind around it. Whereas with a partner, it's like I do actually need, and I do need to find a way for us both to have our needs met as much as we can in our relationship, or some, whatever that means. And so, is there a lot of just like communication? Obviously, education, I assume, is part of this. Getting to know what actually autism is instead of what the 15 things that I thought it was, maybe if I didn't really know what I was talking about for years. A compromise? Is there a big, this has got to play a role in there somewhere, I would think.
Yeah. So the psychoeducation is helpful to a large extent, changes the meaning you're making of interactions, completely changes that, which is powerful. But as far as so what I encourage both people to do is to find wellness and holistic well-being and fulfillment outside of the domain of the relationship as well. So yes, have that as a focus and something you have in goals having goals that you're working toward within the relationship, but mostly allow your energy to be on flourishing. There are certain domains of the human being psyche that we can, if we focus, there's these specific domains that if you focus on flourishing in those domains, the relationship will improve inevitably, but also you won't be as affected by what's not right with it. So that's where we begin.
And is there a refocus, trying to find strengths in the relationship and things as well that might be there, whether or not they're because of the differences in the couple, or trying to look at it, not only the weaknesses? Absolutely. Yes.
So important. Where your focus goes, your energy flows. Of course, that's a very important concept. And it's absolutely true. So, and there's a way to do that that's not overly saccharine, false kind of illusory, but not the polar opposite of that either, where you're just focusing on what is terrible and impossible and hope. It brings me to something that's really important. Sorry, I'm not really directly answering your question, but
very good.
Okay. Oftentimes what comes up is, so we're talking about hope also. So there can be constructive hope and there can be destructive hope, because if there's hope that if many of the women have hope that their partner is going to change and they're going to start to feel, and then with that hope then leads to oftentimes disappointment. And that disappointment is such a deep chasm that they can't really crawl out of. So hope initiated that, right? So this is the type of hope that I'm cautious against versus, constructive hope. What is realistic? Let me see, and this ties in the narrative of what is positive. What are the strengths? Let me actually see those strengths without undermining what needs to be improved. So it's kind of a roundabout way of answering that question.
No, it's good. I find, a lot of times the guests, oftentimes if they answer a question I should have asked or the way I should have asked it, even better. But no, that definitely answers what I was asking.
Okay.
No, I wanted to I know that you use a lot of somatic therapy techniques, and I was curious. I talked to a lot of people on the show here who use different kinds of body movement and somatic ways of processing. And can you tell everybody a little bit about how you do that with couples?
Yeah. So if anyone has not yet experienced the Wim Hof breathing technique, I highly recommend it. So breath work, meditation, visualization, and a bit of tapping, but I'm all for moving the body. So, and I love the fact that there's this walking therapy, that's happening. I want to dive into, because two things I think are happening simultaneously. Here I go off, spinning off in another direction again. Okay, let me come back. Yes. So breath work is incredibly important because you're regulating the nervous system essentially, so that you can actually we can't do any profound work from a state of the amygdala and limbic activation, nervous system anxious or fearful state. We're not going to get anywhere. So we've got to calm the nervous system first, so that we can access different parts of the brain, begin to see things differently. So that's breath work and tapping.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how that has really come into the field, and I see it enhancing and influencing more and more in different areas that people are doing, which is giving that feedback through our body. Basically, and knowing how that works is such a huge sort of hack to the system, so to speak.
So it's so critical. I think, which brings me to the fourth little category, not a little, but the category is holistic mind, body, spirit, energy work, healing, knowing that you're not a one-dimensional being. We're not going to get anywhere if we focus on one dimension. Just change your beliefs or just work on your thoughts. It's impossible if you don't do the emotional body, work with the emotional body, the energetic body. It's all intertwined. We're doing a huge disservice by even spending weeks with a client over a period of time and only addressing one aspect of their dimensionality and expecting that we're going to get to a solution that way. It's impossible. So, and we've lost, here's the last, so important. I think a lot of what's leading to, depression and anxiety is that we've lost our sense of spirit, of spirituality, the knowing of the kingdom of heaven within, so to speak, the sense of being held and guided by the universe, knowing that there's more meaning to one's life and existence. Like that degree, there's so much importance to that. And I recommend anyone who's listening, reading or at least YouTube watching Lisa Miller, PhD, The Awakened Brain. And she speaks to the science behind the importance of integrating spirituality back into our healing process and our sense of self and being in the world is powerful.
Well, it's really important work, and it's a good example of things that just really don't happen by themselves. We tend towards entropy, so to speak, or falling apart without infusing energy into what we're doing. And this is and hard work into relationships of all all kinds, but when people have that, and it's good to know. I mean, there are people out there that are giving that hope and working with people who to form that. I want to give everybody the information of where they can follow you and the stuff that you're doing. Before that, I always like to ask everybody if they have just a way of giving back to the community, or being in touch with other people and helping. It could be a charity or a nonprofit that you like and that you'd recommend, or just a way of being swell to people, whatever it is.
It was unrelated to the topics that we're discussing.
Perfect. Yeah, that's perfect. The whole point, really, it's one of the things that I like actually about doing the show is being able to connect people to all kinds of different causes and organizations that are doing good out there. So absolutely does not have to be related to what we're talking about.
Okay. Yeah. One that is quite, I used to be quite passionate about, just have not been focused lately, and it's still operating Operation Underground Railroad, where they're finding individuals who are being sex trafficked and releasing them, freeing them from that. They're doing the groundwork to do that.
Right. Well, tell people a little bit more where they would find you and become aware more of your work and what you're doing.
Okay. Yeah. So my website, as of the end of tomorrow, I'll have a free guidebook for folks who want to have a process of healing and transformation. So any surface level challenge that they're going through, whether that's in the relationship or work or career or finance, whatever the thing that they feel is holding them back, that one area of their life, that one major challenge is, they can address it mind, body, spirit. They can address it on their multidimensionality aspects of themselves. And there's a specific process that they can go through for healing and for healing the emotional body, the subtle body, the thinking, the beliefs, and that sort of thing, and then implementing new behavior. So it'll be a guidebook, a curated index of information, instead of just going out into the internet and being overwhelmed by. This is a very specific roadmap for them that they can download on my website, design-empowerment@gmail.com.
That's where they'd email you?
Mm-hmm. That's the website, and they can download the guidebook from there.
Designed empowerment?
Designed-empowerment.
Great. Okay.
Yeah, designed, past tense, designed. And then for the Cassandra women or folks, men that have that experience as well. It's thriving-beyond-cassandra-syndrome.com.
Okay.
And Instagram is Unlock Spiritual Power is the Instagram handle. So it's all linked there also.
Great. A wonderful array of different resources and ways that people can reach out to you. Very, very good. I wanted to take a minute just to hit everybody up to remind them of our charity of focus for this month as well. As you know, the Broken Brain picks a local charity or nonprofit to highlight every month and encourage people to check it out. Also, any who join our Patreon during the month, 50% of your donations will go to this organization for as long as you remain a donor to the program as well. So this month we are highlighting Transcending Barriers Atlanta, which is an organization in Georgia, which helps transgendered individuals who are, especially Black transgendered individuals, who they find are disproportionately getting involved with the different legal issues of one kind or another, some of which have to do with transition, especially with complicated things nowadays, and also a population that does face a lot of legal issues. So they help with legal advocacy, education, and representation. So people can go to transcendingbarriersatl.org to learn more about that, to get involved, to donate if you can. And as I always like to say, and this goes for both of what we're highlighting and any charity that you find, if you're in a situation where you cannot donate anything, it doesn't cost anything to share on social media, which most of us are on anyway. So, Lisa, thank you so much. I'm just so grateful for you joining today and for the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Dwight. Thank you so much. And you as well.
Thank you for listening to the Courtemp Arts Podcast Network. To listen to more Courtemp Arts shows, visit courtemparts.com.